My name is Claire. I'm 44 years old, and until 2 years ago, I thought I had seen every type of workplace dysfunction imaginable. I was wrong. The story starts with a promotion. Not mine. Someone else's. Specifically, my former boss's. The day he left, he pulled me aside. "Don't stay here too long." I laughed. He didn't. At the time, I assumed he was talking about career growth. Looking back, I think he was trying to warn me. I just didn't understand the warning yet. 3 months later, I accepted a position at a company called Vantage Dynamics. On paper, it looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. The company was growing. Revenue was up. New clients were signing every quarter. Industry publications loved them. Investors loved them. Employees seemed to love them. The recruiter certainly loved them. During the interview process, I heard the same phrase over and over again. "We're building something extraordinary." By the 5th time, I practically had it memorized. The salary was excellent. The benefits were excellent. The title was a step up from my previous role. Everything looked perfect. Maybe a little too perfect. But after 6 rounds of interviews, countless assessments, and endless meetings, I wasn't interested in looking for problems. I was interested in accepting the offer. So I did. My role was Director of Operational Excellence. Fancy title. Simple mission. Fix inefficiencies. Improve communication. Identify bottlenecks. Help teams work together. At least that's what I thought my job would be. My first week was strange. Not bad. Just strange. Everyone was incredibly busy. The kind of busy that looked impressive. People rushed between meetings. Calendars were completely full. Slack notifications never stopped. Conference rooms were always occupied. Yet somehow nothing ever seemed finished. Every project appeared to be perpetually in progress. Nobody could point to a clear conclusion, or a measurable outcome, or a final product. The company employed nearly 800 people, and somehow everyone seemed occupied while simultaneously accomplishing very little. First, I blamed myself. I was new. Maybe I simply didn't understand the business. That explanation lasted about 2 weeks. Then I met Rachel. Rachel managed one of the analytics teams. Smart. Blunt. Zero patience for corporate nonsense. Which immediately made me like her. We had lunch together after a leadership meeting. Halfway through her sandwich, she asked a question. "So?" I looked up. "So? What do you think so far?" Felt like a trap. I chose my words carefully. "Everyone works very hard." Rachel laughed. Not because I had said something funny, because I had said something safe. That's one way to put it. I waited. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Then she leaned forward. "Have you figured out what we actually do yet?" That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Exactly." Then she changed the subject. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it stayed with me for days. Because I realized something uncomfortable. I couldn't answer her question. Not really. I knew what individual departments did. I knew what teams were assigned. I knew what projects existed. But I couldn't explain how everything connected together. Not clearly. Not logically. For a company of that size, that should have been impossible. A few weeks later, I attended an executive strategy meeting. 22 people in a room. 3 hours. 94 slides. Dozens of charts. Forecasts. Roadmaps. Initiatives. Action items. When the meeting ended, I checked my notes. 3 pages. Not a single concrete decision. 3 hours. Nothing had actually happened. Nobody seemed bothered by this. In fact, everyone acted as though the meeting had been incredibly productive. That was my first real clue. Normal companies measure results. Vantage measured activity. The distinction matters. A lot. Over the following months, I started seeing the same pattern everywhere. Teams celebrated launching projects. Never completing them. Managers tracked meetings. Not outcomes. Departments requested larger budgets every quarter. Nobody questioned whether previous budgets had produced value. Everything revolved around appearances. Progress reports. Status updates. Executive summaries. Presentation decks. More presentations than I thought humanly possible. One afternoon I counted. A single project generated 23 separate presentations. 23. The project itself produced absolutely nothing, but the presentations looked fantastic. When I pointed this out to my manager, he smiled. Perception matters. The answer bothered me, more than it should have. Because perception only matters when reality can't support itself. I didn't say that out loud. Not yet. Instead, I kept observing, listening, learning. And slowly I started noticing something else. The same names appeared everywhere. Not employees, outside consultants, contractors, advisors, strategic partners. No matter which department I reviewed, certain consulting firms kept appearing. Always with large budgets. Always with vague deliverables. Always with glowing reviews. Yet nobody seemed able to explain exactly what they contributed. One name appeared so often that I eventually asked about it. A consulting company called Halcyon Advisory Group. I asked 3 different executives what they did. I received 3 completely different answers. None of them made sense. That night I opened my laptop at home. Not because I was suspicious. Not yet. Because I was curious. Curiosity is dangerous in the wrong company. I spent several hours reviewing organizational charts, budget summaries, project histories, and operational reports. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. Entire departments existed whose purpose nobody could clearly define. Projects routinely consumed millions of dollars without producing measurable results. Teams worked for months on initiatives that quietly disappeared, then reappeared later under different names. I kept waiting for everything to click, for the missing piece to reveal itself. Instead, the puzzle became more confusing. And then I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Nothing confidential. Nothing hidden. Just a report that had been uploaded to the wrong internal folder. A simple mistake. The report compared project spending against actual implementation rates. I expected normal business numbers. Instead, I found something bizarre. Less than 9% of projects had ever been fully implemented. 9%. I checked the figure 3 times. Then 4. Surely I was misunderstanding something. No company could operate like that. Not successfully. Not for years. Yet according to the report, that's exactly what had been happening. Projects launched. Money spent. Teams assigned. Work completed. Then nothing. No implementation. No deployment. No measurable outcome. Just another project replacing the previous one. For the first time since joining Vantage, I felt genuinely uneasy. Because there was a difference between inefficiency and something else. Something intentional. Something systematic. Something designed. I stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Then I noticed something even stranger. The report had been viewed exactly once. By the person who created it. Nobody else. Nobody. A report containing information that should have triggered alarm bells across the company had apparently vanished into obscurity. Almost as if nobody wanted to see it. Or maybe nobody was supposed to. That's when I remembered Rachel's question. Have you figured out what we actually do yet? Sitting alone in my home office, staring at that report, I finally realized something. The question hadn't been a joke. And suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. For the next few days I couldn't stop thinking about that report. 9%. Not 9% successful. 9% implemented. Those were very different things. Companies fail all the time. Projects fail all the time. That's normal. But companies don't survive for years while throwing away over 90% of their work. At least not legitimate ones. So I started asking questions. Carefully. Very carefully. The first thing I learned was that people at Vantage had developed a remarkable talent. They could talk for 20 minutes without saying anything. I would ask simple questions. Who uses this project? Which client requested it? What business outcome did it achieve? The answers always sounded impressive. Never specific. One afternoon I sat down with a project manager named Derek. He had been with the company for almost 6 years. Long enough to know how things worked. Or so I assumed. I pointed at a project summary. What happened with this initiative? Derek glanced at the document. Oh, that was a major success. Great. What changed after it launched? He blinked. What do you mean? What was the result? He stared at me for several seconds. Then he laughed awkwardly. I'd have to check. The initiative had supposedly ended 8 months earlier, and he couldn't explain its outcome, not even broadly. That conversation repeated itself again and again. Different departments, different managers. Same result. Nobody could connect effort to impact. The entire company seemed obsessed with process. Nobody discussed results. The more I looked, the more bizarre it became. Then came the budget review. Officially, my role required me to evaluate operational efficiency. That gave me access to information most employees never saw. And that's when I discovered the consultants. Noticed them before. Now I was actually examining the numbers. The amounts were staggering. Every quarter, tens of millions of dollars flowed to outside consulting firms. Not one, not two, dozens. Some had impressive websites. Some barely existed online. Some appeared to have fewer than 10 employees. Yet they were receiving contracts larger than companies 10 times their size. I started building a spreadsheet. Names, contracts, approval chains, payment histories. Patterns emerged almost immediately. The same executives approved the same vendors. Over and over. Different departments. Different projects. Same consultants. Same approvals. Same outcomes. Nothing. No measurable impact. No visible deliverables. Just invoices. Huge invoices. One evening after most people had gone home, I was reviewing old project records when Rachel appeared beside my desk. "You should leave." I looked up. "Why?" She checked the empty office around us. Then lowered her voice. "Because people notice who stays late." I frowned. That's a strange thing to say. It wasn't a suggestion. For the first time since meeting her, she looked genuinely nervous. That got my attention. I closed my laptop. We walked to the elevators together. Neither of us spoke until we were outside the building. Then she stopped. "I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. Are you investigating something?" The question hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Rachel sighed. "Damn it." My stomach tightened. "What?" She looked toward the building, then back at me. "You found something." It wasn't a question. I could tell from her expression. She already knew. "How long?" I asked. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh people make when they're tired. "About a year." I felt my pulse quicken. A year. I stopped counting. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Claire, this company doesn't operate like a normal business." I nodded slowly. "I've noticed." "No." She shook her head. "You've noticed symptoms." That wasn't reassuring. "What aren't you telling me?" Rachel hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. Finally she did. 3 people before you had your position." I frowned. "I know." "No." She shook her head again. "I mean during the last 4 years." That made me stop walking. 4 years. 3 directors. The average tenure for my position was barely over a year. Suddenly my promotion package looked very different. Why did they leave? Rachel looked away. "Nobody knows." That answer bothered me immediately. People always know. Maybe not officially, but they know. Office gossip travels faster than company email. Yet somehow nobody seemed to know what happened to 3 senior leaders. That wasn't normal. Nothing about this company was normal. Rachel eventually left. But before she did, she offered one final piece of advice. "Trust your instincts." Then she walked away, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. The following week things got worse. Much worse. I was invited to an executive planning session. Normally that wouldn't be unusual. It was my job. What was unusual was what happened afterward. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. 4 hours discussing a proposed transformation initiative. The budget exceeded $25 million. The scope was enormous. The projected benefits sounded revolutionary. Everyone approved it. Everyone celebrated it. Everyone congratulated one another. Then as the room emptied, I noticed something. A folder had been left behind, probably by accident. Inside was a financial projection. 1 page. Just one. I glanced at it and immediately felt my stomach drop. The project's expected operational value was listed as 0. Not low. 0. According to the internal numbers, the project was never expected to improve anything. Not revenue. Not productivity. Not customer satisfaction. Nothing. 0. Yet the budget was $25 million. I stared at the document, certain I was misunderstanding something. Then I looked again. Same result. 0. A project worth millions. Expected to produce nothing. And somehow everyone in the room had approved it. At that moment a realization hit me. Not all at once. Slowly. Like a door opening. What if these projects weren't failing? What if they were succeeding? Not at their stated purpose. At their real purpose. I suddenly remembered every meaningless initiative. Every consultant. Every abandoned project. Every vague explanation. Every missing outcome. Every executive who seemed strangely unconcerned. Maybe they weren't bad at business. Maybe business wasn't what they were actually doing. For the first time since joining Vantage Dynamics, I considered a possibility that felt almost ridiculous. Possibility so extreme I didn't even want to say it out loud. Because if it were true, then the department I had been hired to improve wasn't dysfunctional. It was functioning exactly as intended. And if that was true, someone had hired me without realizing I would eventually notice. Or worse, they had realized it and hired me anyway. After finding the projection sheet, I stopped trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. There probably was one. There usually is. But every explanation I came up with required more imagination than the alternative. And the alternative was becoming harder to ignore. For months I had assumed I was looking at incompetence. Now I was starting to wonder if I was looking at something much worse. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not because I had work to do. Because I wanted to see who else arrived early. It's amazing what people reveal when they think nobody is watching. The building was nearly empty. A few analysts. A few assistants. Maintenance staff. Then around 7:30 the executives started arriving. I noticed something interesting immediately. Several senior leaders entered through a side entrance that most employees didn't use. Nothing illegal about that. But it caught my attention. Especially when I realized the same group frequently arrived together. Even though they worked in different departments. Finance. Operations. Strategy. Procurement. Departments that supposedly operated independently. Yet the same people constantly moved as a unit. I added another note to my growing collection. At this point my notebook had become ridiculous. Names. Dates. Projects. Payments. Conversations. Patterns. Hundreds of observations. Most of them meaningless on their own. Together they painted a picture I didn't like. A week later, something happened that made everything personal. I was called into a meeting with my manager, Victor. Victor had always been pleasant, professional, supportive, the kind of executive who remembered birthdays, which made what happened next even stranger. As soon as I entered his office, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt different. Controlled. Careful. Like he'd rehearsed the conversation beforehand. He gestured toward a chair. I sat. He smiled. Then he slid a document across the desk. An organizational review. My review. I skimmed the pages. Everything looked positive. Strong leadership. Excellent analytical skills. High performance. Then I reached the final section. Areas of concern. There was only one item. 1. Excessive focus on activities outside assigned responsibilities. I read it twice. Then looked up. Victor smiled again. The same friendly smile. Only now it felt artificial. What does this mean? He folded his hands. It means you're spending time examining areas that aren't directly related to your role. I stared at him. Operational reviews are literally my role. His smile never changed. To a point. That answer told me everything. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't. No examples. No specifics. No performance concerns. Just a warning disguised as feedback. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. I walked out with a knot in my stomach. Because someone was paying attention. Noticing patterns is one thing. Being noticed for noticing patterns is something else entirely. That afternoon I messaged Rachel. We need to talk. Her response arrived almost instantly. Not here. 3 words. Nothing more. We met after work at a small restaurant nearly 40 minutes from the office. Marcus joined us. Until that moment I hadn't realized he was involved. Apparently Rachel trusted him, which meant I trusted him too. At least temporarily. For the next 2 hours we compared notes. And that's when I realized how much larger the problem was. Both of them had been collecting information independently, not together, separately, for over a year. Rachel focused on project approvals. Marcus focused on vendor relationships. I focused on operational performance. 3 different paths, all leading toward the same conclusion. That wasn't coincidence. That was confirmation. Marcus pulled out his laptop. What he showed me made my blood run cold. A network diagram. Hundreds of connections. Consulting firms. Contractors. Subsidiaries. Partnerships. Shell organizations. Many of them appeared unrelated. Until you followed the money. Then the connections became obvious. The same directors appeared repeatedly. The same addresses appeared repeatedly. The same legal representatives appeared repeatedly. Different company names. Same people. Same money. Same circle. I stared at the screen. How is this possible? Marcus laughed bitterly. Because nobody looks. The worst part? He was right. Nobody looked. Employees focused on deadlines. Managers focused on presentations. Executives focused on growth metrics. Everyone stayed busy. Nobody asked why. That realization bothered me more than anything else. Because suddenly I understood the company's greatest strength. It wasn't technology. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't leadership. It was distraction. Constant distraction. The entire organization was drowning in activity. And activity is an excellent way to prevent people from thinking. The following month became the most stressful period of my career. Every day I discovered something new. Every day the picture became clearer. And every day I became more convinced that someone would eventually realize what we were doing. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, that fear became reality. I returned from lunch and found my desk unusually clean. Too clean. At first I thought housekeeping had been through. Then I noticed something missing. My notebook. The notebook. The one containing nearly 6 months of observations. Gone. I checked every drawer. Every cabinet. Every shelf. Nothing. The notebook had disappeared. My heart started racing. I told myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe I'd taken it home. Maybe I'd moved it. Maybe. No. I knew better. An hour later, I received a calendar invitation. Sender Victor. Subject quick check-in. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. My stomach dropped immediately. I don't know how to explain it. There was nothing threatening about the invitation. Nothing unusual. Yet I knew. The same way you know when a storm is coming before the rain starts. Something had changed. Someone had made a move. And for the first time since joining Vantage Dynamics, I wasn't worried about losing my job. I was worried about what would happen if I kept it. Because if my notebook had truly been taken, then someone inside the company knew exactly how much I had discovered. And that meant the game we had been quietly playing for months was finally over. The question was whether we were ready for what came next. I barely slept that night. Not because I thought I was in danger. Because uncertainty is exhausting. Your brain keeps searching for answers that don't exist yet. By 3 in the morning I had already imagined 50 different scenarios. None of them ended well. At 8:30, I was sitting at my desk pretending to work. At 8:55, I walked toward Victor's office. At exactly 9 I knocked. Come in. He sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. I entered. Victor stood by the window, coffee in hand, smiling. The picture of a relaxed executive. Claire. I sat down. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he placed a folder on the desk. My notebook. I recognized it immediately. Every muscle in my body tightened. Victor noticed. Of course he noticed. That was probably the point. He tapped the notebook lightly. You left this in a conference room. A lie. A ridiculous lie. But one neither of us intended to challenge. I see. Thought you'd want it back. I nodded. Neither of us touched the folder. The notebook sat between us like a third participant in the conversation. Then Victor leaned back. Can I give you some advice? Here it comes. Of course. The most successful people in large organizations understand something important. I waited. They understand which questions are worth asking. Silence. Then. And which questions are expensive? There it was. Not a threat. Not directly. Something much more sophisticated. A warning wrapped in career advice. The kind that leaves no evidence. The kind that sounds harmless if repeated later. I forced a smile. I'll keep that in mind. His smile returned. The meeting ended shortly afterward. No accusations. No confrontation. No direct references. Just a message. We both understood it perfectly. When I left his office, my decision was already made. We were out of time. That evening I met Rachel and Marcus. For the first time since we'd started comparing notes, nobody argued. Nobody suggested waiting. Nobody suggested gathering more information. The notebook changed everything. Because if management knew we were looking, eventually they would figure out what we had found. And if that happened before we acted, months of work could disappear overnight. So we stopped investigating. Instead, we started organizing. Every document. Every approval record. Every vendor relationship. Every payment trail. Everything. For nearly 3 weeks, our lives revolved around evidence. After work. Weekends. Late nights. Spreadsheets. Timelines. Cross-references. What surprised me most wasn't how difficult it was. It was how obvious the pattern became once everything was assembled in one place. The company wasn't chaotic. It wasn't disorganized. It wasn't incompetent. It was remarkably efficient. Just not at the thing it claimed to do. Projects existed to justify budgets. Budgets justified contracts. Contracts justified payments. Payments moved through networks of companies connected by the same small group of people. Again and again. Different names. Same destination. The entire machine had been engineered beautifully. Not to create value. To create complexity. Because complexity hides things. And Vantage was very, very complex. Eventually we reached a point where there was nothing left to add. The picture was complete. Terrifying. But complete. Rachel looked at us across the table. So what now? Nobody answered immediately. Because we all knew the answer. The hard part wasn't finding the truth. The hard part was deciding what to do with it. Marcus finally spoke. We report it. Simple. Direct. Terrifying. I expected resistance. There wasn't any. We were past that stage. Over the following days, we contacted authorities through protected reporting channels. Carefully. Methodically. Professionally. No dramatic speeches. No secret meetings in parking garages. Real life is less exciting than movies. Mostly it's paperwork. Lots and lots of paperwork. Then we waited. And waited. And waited. Nothing happened. A week passed. Then another. Then a month. Life inside Vantage continued normally. Meetings. Presentations. Budget approvals. Consultants. The machine kept running. Part of me started wondering whether we'd been wrong. Maybe investigators had looked at everything and found nothing. Maybe there was an explanation after all. Then came Thursday. I'll never forget that Thursday. I arrived at work around 8 o'clock. The lobby felt different immediately. Quieter. Tenser. Groups of people stood together whispering. Nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening. But everyone knew something was. By 9 o'clock, executive conference rooms were occupied. Not by executives. By investigators. The rumors spread through the building faster than wildfire. Financial crimes units. Regulatory agencies. Search warrants. Audits. Data seizures. Interviews. By noon, panic had replaced confusion. People weren't working anymore. They were watching. Waiting. Speculating. I remember standing near a window with Rachel. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Months of questions were finally receiving answers. Not from us. From professionals. Exactly as they should. Around 2 o'clock, Victor walked through the office. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked old. Not physically. Emotionally. like someone carrying a weight that had suddenly become impossible to hold. Our eyes met briefly. Then he looked away. That was the last time I ever saw him. Over the following year, the investigation expanded, then expanded again, and again. The deeper authorities looked, the worse things became. Shell companies, fake consulting contracts, artificial project structures, circular financial transactions, everything we suspected, and plenty we hadn't. Several executives were eventually charged. Others agreed to cooperate. Entire divisions disappeared. Contracts were canceled. Assets were frozen. The company that had once seemed unstoppable collapsed with astonishing speed. Turns out giant structures fall quickly once you remove the illusion holding them together. For most employees, the experience was devastating. Many had done absolutely nothing wrong. They had simply shown up every day and done their jobs. Just like I had. The difference was that eventually we started asking questions. A year later, I accepted a position at another company. A real company. One that actually built things, solved problems, delivered results. The adjustment was strange. During my first month, I kept waiting for projects to disappear, for reports to be ignored, for outcomes not to matter. Instead, people actually used the work. Clients depended on it. Decisions were made because of it. The novelty took weeks to wear off. One afternoon, my new CEO thanked my team for completing a difficult initiative. Then he showed us exactly how the project improved the business. The room applauded. Not because they were told to, because they could see the result. Driving home that evening, I thought about Vantage, about Rachel, about Marcus, about everything that happened, and I realized something. The biggest lesson wasn't about corruption, or fraud, or corporate misconduct. It was about attention. Most people assume large organizations must know what they're doing. That if enough people participate in something, it must make sense. That if everyone acts confident, someone must be in control. But that's not always true. Sometimes entire systems survive because nobody wants to be the first person to ask an uncomfortable question. And sometimes one simple question changes everything. Not, who is responsible? Not, who benefits? The question that started it all was much simpler. A question Rachel asked me during lunch on my second week. Question I couldn't answer then, but could answer now. What do we actually do here? Turns out the people running Vantage never wanted anyone to ask that question. Because once we did, the whole thing started falling apart.